The era of treason and betrayal, the night of crystal tears. The Ashen nation had begun its death march with the growth of a civil war led on by a collapsing government. Andinator, an ex-AI member and current Ashen diplomat, had challenged his own leader to a duel atop their volcano. "The winner gets to take the position of leader for this nation," exclaimed Andinator. Fire accepted. Come the next day, news of the Ashen dispute had reached Cody. He organized a meeting with both Ashen members to come to an semblance of agreement. The meeting began with Cody forcing order amongst the two and debriefing each on the situation at hand. He explained that in order for their nation to have even the slightest chance of surviving against the Brotherhood, then they would need to come to a common ground about how the team should be run and what its future would be. Both parties agreed. They spent the better part of 2 hours debating about what issues were caused by who and their own ways of fixing of them. It then soon came to Cody's attention that Fire was hesitating far too much with his responses. He was starting to refuse to answer questions that involved his conversations with the Brotherhood. After some questioning, Cody had managed to corner Fire in a web of his own, his poorly spun lies. Fire, out of ideas and defenses, admitted to an act that tore the very peace out of the hearts of all who listened. "I'm gonna leave the team and join the Brotherhood," he blurted, with the sound of raspy shame. Andinator immediately went in for Fire's throat, drawing his sword. "Hold on," sparked Cody, with an authoritative and agitated tone. "Fire, you imbecile," exclaimed Cody. "This is exactly what they want. Do you really aim to disgrace your entire legacy as king? Just to become a slave for the Brotherhood? They do not care for you, Fire. You're a wasted slot to them, and once they're done using your nation to feed Paradox's bloodlust, who do you think they'll target next? You are in the only position you have to be part of something greater and fix this nation for good. Stop trying to run from defeat like a blood-born coward." It seemed that after this, that Fire's mind finally began to operate as evolution intended. "You're right," went Fire. Thus had started the Ashen movement towards unification and growth. It began with Fire renouncing the Brotherhood and ordering his team to gather apples imbued with magics and gold, as well as death-defying totems with emerald eyes. Andinator had now also begun scouting out the Brotherhood's bases. His intentions were to find weak points in the base that the Ashen nation could exploit. He had unknowingly placed the final block to the bridge of his nation's demise. Sir Jeffington had caught sight of the act and notified the Brotherhood immediately. He had chosen to betray his nation with his king. But, after finding out Fire had gone back on himself, Jeff decided to stay with the Brotherhood and gain his place as one of their honorary members. The next day had entered its first stages of sunrise, the air brittle as the wind brought in the fresh scent of an eluded continuity. The Ashen nation didn't yet realize that they were drawing their last breaths, and that most of them wouldn't live to see the day's end. The waves at the Ashen western coasts were swaying gently against the shoreline, bringing in the smell of salt and sand from the beach just opposite them. It blended with the smell of the foods that filled Vacant's village like a densely packed fog. The village burst into life with people headed to work to aid in expanding the village. The sounds of their work could be heard from deep in the jungles behind them as buildings were erected. But it wasn't long until the mellow splashing of the Eastern River was interrupted by an incoming ship of travelers disturbing the peace. The ship was met with celebration from the villagers as they witnessed it sailing in from a distance. But as it grew closer, their joyous response began to dim. The bright red paint on some parts of the ship's hull had been replaced with a bearish brown from underneath. and they could see holes and the charred marks in the ship's sails and mast, spelling out the ending for the message to come. The ship began to dock, but at a pace far too fast, and slammed against the port. The ship's deck had 2 wounded soldiers on it, and 3 more struggling to walk. War! A pained grunt mixing with his final word, brotherhood. The explorer collapsed into the arms of 2 villagers. Over at the Brotherhood's capital, Mystic Light had begun his team's first step in the counterattack. He sent 2 of his most skilled and stealthy soldiers over to the Ashen lands to scout and find out any information that would provide them an advantage in the upcoming war. This step in his plan was merely just as an act of payback for the enemy having entered his kingdom, and not because his nation needed any advantage. These 2 soldiers, named Stella and Paradox, stalked one of the Ashen officials and documented the areas they frequented in hopes of, by some miracle, he'd reveal the location of the Ashen's key storages and/or any secret bases. Once they had collected their information, Mystic Light gave the order to the 2 men that they are to reveal themselves and show their enemy just how outmatched they were. If they couldn't detect any of the Brotherhood soldiers, then how would they hope to win a war against their entire nation? After the soldiers had made their presence known, Andinator, an official they stalked, began to flee. He ran into and through the jungle in a frenzy, hoping, praying he could shake them off and escape what he thought would be an immediate death. His panicked breaths providing him no respite from the hunters and only encouraged him to continue his sprint until he was too exhausted to continue. When he had finally collapsed from all the running, he turned around to crawl along the sands of the southern beach of his island, cowering with his arms over his face, waiting for a strike to come down, his breath sharp in the ocean air, as phlegm turned his gasps into a mild, fear-filled growl. In his fright, he hadn't realized that his enemy had stopped chasing him long ago. Upon his realization, he took to laying flat on the sand, cussing at the sky, as if hoping for the Arks and Dians to agree with him. Filthy Polaks, filthy men. It was during this moment of rage that led him to come to a deep realization. His nation had no chance to win this war, and that their team's aim shouldn't be to win, but to deal as much damage to his enemies as possible, by any means necessary. Andinator formed a group to assist him on his first plan against the Brotherhood. Their goal? Sabotage. His group consisted of himself, TLM, and Vacant. They headed to a large fort made by Stella in the most northern point on the island and began to damage key farms that would aid in the war. The Brotherhood received damage to gold and gunpowder farms by use of lava and manual removal of blocks. After this, TLM began to chart and document the location of the Brotherhood's nether highways. It wasn't soon too long before they heard the portal closest to them opening, a low yet recognizable hum, followed by a loud draft of air being blown into the nether and pulled back out with its closing. Paradox had stepped through the portal, his weapon freshly sharpened and accompanied with a mocking laugh that echoed out from within his helmet, like he had been possessed by a lunatic. No words were shared between the two, for Paradox had already struck TLM with his weapon, breaking his leg. TLM began to crawl away before being dragged back by his ankle. He rolled over onto his back and stared up at the man above him, a slight smile staring back down through a gap in Paradox's helm as he held his weapon out in front of him and dropped it onto his opponent's neck, killing him instantly. Paradox reveled in his victory, and thus did not make haste in hunting the others. Paradox awaited for Stella so they could enact the next stage in their plan. Andinator and Vacant began to run as far as they could back to the Ashen Islands, as to not risk their own lives any further. They knew they couldn't win. Not against that. Upon making it back to their lands, they did not inform their team as to what had happened, or as to what was found, and only asked that they get ready for the soon-to-come war. The Ashen nation took to collecting their armor, some of which hadn't yet even been enchanted. As the Ashen nation collected their equipment, the sun finally began its descent, trembling behind the horizon, awaiting the arrival of a battle. A fire is about to be extinguished, leaving the Ashen nation in darkness and a country divided. All those working at Vacant's village struggled hard to meet their leaders' growing demands, laboring themselves into the night, still preparing for the upcoming war, until a loud, pained shriek was heard. Vacant was attacked within his own home, the entirety of the Ashen nation focusing on his abode. They watched as his body slumped down and out of his door, reaching out, grasping for the frame as he was kicked further down the steps by Paradox, sending him flying backwards and forcing the very blood in his body to run by fleeing out through his mouth. Only adding to the surmounting threat, Stella had also arrived, stepping over Vacant's body to assist her brother in arms. Paradox, with the scent of war guiding him, began to hunt down his next victim. He searched every home he found, his efficiency only increased by his potions of strength and speed. All in the village fled from the attackers, some to their ships, others to their capital and the Nether, and some even attempted to swim the southern river. No matter their attempts, the Brotherhood would see them all stained more red than even the armor of the Inquisition. The next person to fall was Rusty. She had taken to hiding within a basement inside her home at the Ashen capital, a mistake she would soon realize with a crushing weight. Paradox rushed down the basement, and without a second thought, he descended upon her hiding spot, and, with a swift strike, ended her life. During this, Stella studied her map and witnessed the Ashen all headed to the same area, the Ashen port. Stella began to give chase by excelling through the eastern river towards the fleeing fleet. The Ashen's members watched in horror as Stella spiraled past them and launched herself out of the water and straight through the ship's mast and sail. The soldiers aboard the ship readied their bows and took aim, passing with a thwip and a splash as the arrows drowned themselves in the futile goal to hit their target. Not taking any chances, Stella took to ramming into the vessel's rear. The sounds of wood splintering and the paired rocking of the Ashen ship embedded the deep understanding into Andinator, Titanium, and a broken, bloodied Vacant that they were going to die. They changed course and instead took aim for the Red Desert along the southernmost sections of Arkadia. More would soon add to its color. It was not long after this that Aido made his appearance and met with Paradox down at Vacant's village. They too watched as the Ashen ship sailed by and continued its charge towards the rust-colored sands of the mesa. Without a moment to spare, the two of them dove straight into the southern river and aided Stella in her chase. As the chase went on, Andinator tended to Vacant's wounds. Titanium steered their ship to safety and began to revitalize him. Vacant's consciousness slowly came back to him. He began to stand, struggling as if the ship's floor had been turned to ice. He slipped down onto the deck, revealing the crumbling remains of a totem of undying as the pieces drifted out from his pockets along the creaking red floors of the ship's deck. Hitting the shore in due time, Andinator, shouted Titanium as he argued against the winds, propelling them along the sea's edge. From one nightmare to another, Vacant was finally slammed into his senses as they crashed along the red beach. All three of them flung into the sands below, leaving deep and slitten imprints of their fall in the ground they now arose from. They all looked up to three unflinching sets of eyes: Aido, Stella, and Paradox. The three members of the Brotherhood were armed to the teeth, chewing on golden apples like Julenheim herself blessed them. Glinting steel sparked in Paradox's and Ido's hands as they let the metal of their blades tear into and brutalize what was left of the Ashen Empire. Paradox, displeased with Vacant's still beating heart, engaged in a dance of conflict with him, moving with the sounds of battle like a demented interpretation of music. Swing, ching, tink. Vacant's helmet is lynched from off of his head, and so failed to protect him from the impact of Paradox's warhammer. Vacant kissed the floor with a wet thump as his life poured out from him once more, his final moments gazed upon by the uncaring eyes of war. Andinator was next to fall, challenged by Aido, protected only by an incomplete set of armor, purchased from his allies, and a withered skull he had used in his attempt to hide. Andinator held dearly onto his weapon and swung wildly at Aido, who blocked and weaved past the oncoming attacks, making his way ever closer. Aido landed a key slash along Andinator's mask, causing him to reel back in pain. He swung once more at Aido, who used Andinator's blade to guide his own, stepping forward and pulling his blade back until he was free to grab Andinator's wrist. Andinator froze, but not out of fear. Aido had just plunged his blade into Andinator's chest and, in his inexperience, had unknowingly missed his heart. Aido, with Andinator's body slumped against him, began to push his limping frame off of his blade by pressing him backwards by the shoulder, but was interrupted by the gruesome sound of Andinator's head being ripped off segment by segment from his own neck. Paradox had just decapitated Andinator before his very eyes. "Aim higher next time," grunted Paradox, who had proven yet again as to why he was so renowned. Stella, during all of this, had taken to battling Titanium Frog and took it upon herself to put his name to the test. It began with Titanium running to the water to challenge Stella. This mistake only provided Stella with the advantage, as she readied her trident and began to barrel towards Titanium. Each hit she landed only increasing the certainty of Titanium's defeat. Despite this fact, Titanium stood his ground and made way to the shore in an attempt to equalize the playing field. He readied his weapon, showing no fear as he watched his comrades fall around him, his heart racing as he watched Stella torpedo out from under the waves and into the sky as she came hurtling down upon him, landing on the sand with a mighty blow. He took his first strike, 2 strikes, hitting Stella directly as she made her way towards him. This would be all he would accomplish, though, as Stella began to revise her strategy and began to sashay around his attacks, deflecting and blocking all that came towards her. Titanium, outmatched and cornered, bare witness to the Brotherhood who began their approach onto his location. As his eyes turned back to focus on the battle, he was met with a horizontal cut to the eyes from the left and another diagonally upwards from the right that cut deep into his arm and shoulder. He dropped down, crippled and destined for death, his blood painting a ground he couldn't see. The Brotherhood were done here and now had a runaway flame to put out. The Brotherhood took to repairing what little damage they had taken to their equipment before they began scouring their maps to find Fire's whereabouts. After some time, the Brotherhood had discovered that Fire was using AI territory to protect himself, and thusly received warning that his presence there would destroy his already crumbling relations with the AI. He immediately fled the area and began his sprint towards the center of the island. He would never reach that point. Fire, understanding that he couldn't win this fight head-on, began to tower up into the sky with the intention of being able to revise the situation and earn himself victory against the Brotherhood. He was soon intercepted and was immediately met with a barrage of arrows fired by Stella and Paradox. He received multiple blows, but his balance did not falter. The world seemed to take pity on him. Stella was in swift pursuit and began building up to attack Fire. He was not escaping. The looming threat put sweat on Fire's brow. He had to think of a plan fast and make sure it worked. "I'm gonna get ya," he proclaimed, jumping down to land on Stella, aiming to gain the upper hand. However, his luck had run out. One arrow shot out, further than the others, gliding through the air as if it were on a death mission, and hit Fire straight in between his legs as he fell. Stella triumphantly put away her bow, watching as the impact of the arrow interrupted Fire's trajectory, and he was left propelling down towards the cold earth. Fire collided with the ground, his feather falling, protecting him from death, but not from the sudden shock to his head, placing him immediately unconscious. Down near where Fire made his impact, Paradox was waiting, ready with rope in hand to restrain the frenzied flame, and ready to carry him over his shoulder so he could be executed. Fire had been extinguished at last. The day grew anew, and the soldiers made their way to the Ashen capital to meet with their leader, who had built a platform for Fire to be executed on. He was to be led down towards the very volcano he lived upon, and was marched towards the edge of the platform. All watched on from their seats, awaiting Fire's demise. "Any last words?" asked Mystic, with a lack of remorse in his voice. Fire responded, "Yeah, him a kill anyone who betrayed me." The crowd retaliated with a light laugh under each of their breaths, and thus Mystic held Fire by the back of his neck, taking a moment to enjoy the mountain breeze before finally tossing him into the bubbling ocean of orange below, burning away any hopes that this Fire had of being king. The Ashen War had met its close, and the era of the Brotherhood had embedded itself in history.